Good evening, and I would like to welcome you to the February 20th.
Mine is okay.
Committee of the whole. And just as a reminder, of the law, purpose and direction. The purpose of the North Platte Public School District is I'll make the motion for the approval.
And my mic is off, so just, no.
Yeah. These are my-
Angela made the motion, I second.
Okay, yeah, I got that.
And I would like to entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion for the approval of the agenda.
Wait, second.
That's Cindy that seconded?
Yes.
Joanne Landry?
Aye.
Cindy O'Connor?
Aye.
Skip Altsy?
Aye.
Angela Blaze?
Aye.
Matthew Peterson?
Aye.
Emily Garrett?
Aye, but I am still present. Just so you know. There.
I am. Okay, got it.
I will now invite everyone to join me in the pledge of allegiance. I
I
pledge
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so we're going to move on to the board engagement portion, and our first item is school visits. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank everybody that has scheduled a visit or that's in the process of scheduling a visit with some of our district leadership. As we get into buildings with district administrators, I think it's going to help us be more aware of what's being done in our district to improve students' learning. And I personally think there's some great things going on, just the things that I see on social media and the schools that I've been in. There's some really neat things going on. I would also encourage you as you visit schools to ask questions and seek to understand. It's important as we start our strategic plan update this year. And one of the things that I pulled just to share tonight is from the second Iowa school board study that was done. One of the important things for a board is to have shared leadership. And so part of that is that board members are knowledgeable about learning conditions in the schools, alternatives for improving education and the needs of students. Board members can mention specific initiatives that are underway and can explain the initiative and clearly identify specific ways that the board contributed to the initiative. Board members described a clear vision or a clear direction and focus on specific goals related to improved reading. Board members could describe the work of staff around the goals in clear specific terms. Board members could describe what is happening in the classrooms and with instruction. And I think even though we may not be able to do that perfectly as we go on these visits, it's going to help us be able to talk about these things publicly with people a little bit more easily. So I just thank you for your efforts. So next, I would like to talk about the finance training. So this is the one that's being offered by the School Board Association, and it is coming up here in March. The dates, or the date for the one in North Platte is March 19th, and it's at venue 304. The portion of this training that's recommended is that we go to the evening session. That starts at, it says 5 p.m. is registration, 5:30 is dinner, followed by the workshop, and it's done by 8:30. The registration for that needs to be done by the 14th of March. So where it's in North Platte, I'm hoping most, if not all of us can go. I don't know who all is planning or any planning to. Okay. Okay, so just encourage that. And then also, let's see. Okay, so then the next thing I wanted to talk about is the strengths-based leadership training. This was something that I wanted to approach the board about. I had a conversation with the board president in Hastings, just when after our first committee of the whole meeting, I wanted to talk to some other school districts who had done the committee of the whole, and so I reached out to a couple of different board presidents. And as I was talking to her, the strengths-based leadership came up. She happens to be a strengths coach in Hastings for the hospital there. And it reminded me that we had gone through portions of the training with Sherry last year. And I wanted to continue that training. One of the things that I chose not to do this year is I chose not to go to the president's retreat. I've been to 3 of them, and so not that there's not things that can't be learned, but I just felt like it was a little redundant and I wanted to do something new. So I reached out to Sherry and asked her what it would cost for myself to participate in the training. And then if I invited, or if everybody approved the leadership team, so Emily and Cindy, if you're interested in doing that, what the cost would be. Sherry said for me to participate in the training, it would be $500, and that's taking into account her travel and the time that she would need to prepare for that. If I invited, or if you want to come, then it would be an additional $250. So for the 3 of us to participate in that training, it would be $750. So I just wanted to see if anybody had any comments, or if you care if that's something that we participate in, or do you have any questions about it?
So how does that differ from what we did previously at our board retreat?
So this would be a little bit more of an in-depth look into our board overall, and it would give us some more insights into specific strengths of board members and how we could utilize those to be a benefit.
But only 3 of you would do it?
Well, if everybody's interested, I could see what it would take for another session with her. But that was my initial thought was just
My
the leadership.
comment, I'll go back, was to see how we all work together and strengths and weaknesses. You only do half the board, you have the other half that's left out.
Well, it sounds like a lot of the cost is just coming, I mean, if that's $500 of it, it's only $250 to add a couple more. I think it'd be worth seeing if that's something the board's interested in pursuing. To me, it seems like it would make more sense to have full board.
I agree.
Involved in it.
Yeah, I think, just doing the math, you're probably looking at $1,100 to $1,200 for all 6.
And I looked, if I would have gone to the president's retreat just for myself to go, it would have been around $500.
Yeah.
And so I feel like the cost that she's proposing is not out of the question, so. So I will, email her and see what she would do as far as doing another session with the whole board. And I can bring that back at our March committee of the whole, if that sounds reasonable. Okay. The next item is the board self-assessment. In visiting with Dr. Rhodes, we were thinking that we would send the board self-assessment out in March. And then we would look at having our retreat maybe sometime in April is what the proposal is at the moment. So, and this is something that we, I think, all participated in before, so it would be very similar where it's an online process and we would get to review that at our retreat. So, okay.
Did that come and we fill that out on the computer?
Yeah, it's online.
Yeah.
And that's through NASB.
Yeah, all right.
And then finally, upcoming training opportunities. This isn't necessarily training, but the retirement will be after our next committee of the whole meeting. So if you want to get signed up for that, this is something you pay for individually. So there's, if you need the link, there's a link there. And I think Brandon, you sent it out to the school all,
Yeah,
didn't
it's
you? Just,
On our community links.
yeah.
Post on our site.
So if you haven't taken the opportunity to do that, I would encourage you to do that. And then also there are some upcoming training opportunities with NASB in June. So it still gives you a little bit of time to think about it. There was a leadership opportunity and that one didn't have any information with it yet. And then there's also the legal workshop, and I think that one was in Kearney. So that one is one that they usually do every June. So just be thinking about that, and if you'd like to participate in that, then we can talk about it in the coming weeks. So, and then Dr. Rhodes was going to share some things with us.
So I just printed some hard copies of the agenda for the external visit on March 24th through the 26th. And for board purposes and obviously for board engagement, Sunday, March 24th, about 4:30 in this room is when we'll get started with introductions of both our internal folks that'll be here, which will be district administration, building administrators, and then of course our external team and the Board of Education. We'll have a meal where we'll kind of divide up with different groups, and we'll divide up our external team. There are 10 of those individuals. And then one of the things they do is they do a board interview. And so everybody will leave, and then that external team will have an interview with you. They'll just have pretty general questions for you as school board members and your feelings and thoughts and perceptions of the school district. And then you just for your reference, you can kind of see there how we have it divided up, and then those 10 folks will divide up into pairs. And they'll be out in buildings and be doing building observations. They'll be interviewing our SIP teams at each building and our building principals. And then they'll visit with kids, staff, both teachers and classified folks. And then visit with students as well. They do student interviews as well. So they really do a nice job of kind of getting some perception data based on face-to-face interviews with different groups. But I would bring your attention to the back end. Tuesday, March 26th. They will be presenting to anybody in the district over at the Performing Arts Center in the high school, beginning at 3:30 on that Tuesday afternoon. So they'll kind of present just kind of a summary. It will not be their exit report, but there will be some highlights that they will summarize from their visit. And that'll probably be a 45 to 60-minute presentation they will give. We'd love to have you there to hear their closing remarks. And then it'll take a while before we actually get the exit report from you. It'll take months before we get that. It's a pretty lengthy document, and there's a lot of work on the back end that they need to do as well. So if those dates work for you, please get those in your calendar. I know we've talked about the 24th, but I don't think we've probably talked about that presentation and the exit summary on the 26th. So. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we will move on to the finance update, and Stuart, I think you were going to share that with us.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm gonna work my computer here, and make sure I'm doing it right. Okay, what do I choose? There we go. Never mind. Had to open it up. I'm getting used to this Mac, so thank you. As I've done in the past, I've always taken the board through the documentation in regards to state aid, because that's one of the first pieces that have to go into developing our budget. And as Dr. Rhodes and Skip and I watch legislation, we're very much concerned about what the legislature is going to do in regards to state aid, if they are going to do anything. In the past, what we've seen is that they've either postponed the issuance of state aid, or they've put in some additional changes, like to the local effort rate, and then went through and passed it at a different point in time in the legislature. This year, it's March 1, it has been certified, but this certification just came through today, but actually the number that we have here does not change with the certification. It's the same number. It's just that we're always apprehensive going into the budget season, not knowing what the state aid is. So with that, I put a document together, as I've done every year, trying to hopefully help everybody understand the state aid and how it's calculated and all the bits and pieces that go into the calculation of state aid. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of it so that you can get sort of a good foundation as we go into the budget season. And for me, I want to say the budget season is 12 months out of the year, because we really do start in October with enrollment, then our annual financial report, then our audit, and then now we're working into state aid. We'll start talking about other funds in the future, as well as just the regular expenditures, and then move forward as far as property taxes are concerned. So with that, I do want to give you a little, I tried to give you a little bit of background in regards to state aid and what it's gone through to put it together. And we've seen budget constraints, levy limitations, reductions in state aids over the course of the period, as well as we always monitor current economic conditions that will affect North Platte Public Schools, and the realization and the review of current programs and services so that we can set the priority for our resources moving forward. What you see in front of you, besides the purpose and direction that Joanne read to you today, we also have our values that we address internally within the cabinet as well as our EDCO, so that we can set a good foundation as we talk on whatever level, whether it's in instruction or teachers, or for our purposes, budget and finance. Along with that, and Dr. Rhodes will be going through this later today, but I always put in for the finance, whether it's our monthly financial report, the board finance discussion, or on this one is our state aid document, the strategic plan number 3, which really addresses where we are or where we want to be with budget and finance. And I'm not going to go through that, but I will give you the opportunity to read it later on as you pull it up. Give Matt a bad time pull it up when you're going back. But when we look at the TIOSA formula, and the TIOSA is the Tax Equity and Educational Opportunity Support Act. So when you go to various, training opportunities, like Joanne is talking about, you're gonna maybe hear TIOSA coming up. And that's one of the items that you need to be aware of, which is how state aid is put together. And I only address how it affects North Platte Public Schools. You know, if we talk about Lincoln or Omaha, or maybe a small district, you're gonna see some of those factors change accordingly based upon their size and what is happening. But for North Platte Public Schools, we're gonna address what goes on within our formula. So when we look at state aid, or we look at the budget, we look at our sufficient cash reserves, meeting our monthly obligations, as well as the cost for our desired educational program. So when we look at our state aid formula, we can also look at the formula, and it's a very simple formula. And when you watch the legislature, they're always going, oh, this formula is so confusing, or so different. It shouldn't be so confusing to me. And in that, it has to have the factors in, because North Platte is not like Lexington, which is not like Lincoln. You have various factors that go into the adjustment of that formula. So we have to at least address the poverty, or ELL, or transportation. I mean, we don't have transportation like we could even say a Maxwell or Hershey does, because they're running buses up and down, I don't know how many roads to get their students. And Dr. Rhodes can at least attest to that from being at Maxwell and Gothenburg, because of the amount of students that they have, but the distance between their homes and the schools. So for North Platte Public Schools purposes, we look at our student enrollment, which we talked about in October. We also talk about our pupil costs, our ELL. Very much concerned about free lunch and our poverty students, but I will get into that in a little bit in regards to our poverty program and how that was driven. System averaging adjustment, and system averaging, and I will mention it here, is that we're sort of on the cusp of being small, but being large. So we get that opportunity of the system averaging adjustment, allowing us, because we have more than 900 kids, to get a little bit of a perspective or a factor built into our need side of the formula, so we can make sure that we have enough resources available for North Platte Public Schools. Obviously, we're always concerned with what Vic and Betsy do during the summer and our summer school allowance, and then obviously special ed comes into play, and we'll address special ed coming up here in a little bit. Also then after that, big factor is our valuations, option enrollment students, allocation of income tax funds and miscellaneous receipts, and then finally foundation aid. And so when we get into the numbers, hopefully I've given you enough documentation, so when you get into the numbers, it's not as confusing, because I want to make sure I address everything appropriately.
Can I have a
Yeah.
question real quick?
No, that's fine. You interrupt me. I start going and then I can't stop.
The system averaging adjustment, is that what it means when you're in equalized school? Is that the portion of that?
From a system averaging adjustment, what it does, and I had brought this in so I can make sure I address it. What it says is system averaging adjustment is calculated for any district more than 900 formula students and are lower basic funding per pupil student than the average basic funding per formula students for all districts with 900 or more students. So for our purposes, we have more than 900 students, so we're going to get a little bit of that averaging adjustment, but I don't know what the cost or formula students would be, because that wasn't published until right before we came in
Well,
here.
my question comes because I've heard Senator Jacobson say that North Platte is the only equalized school in District 42, and so I haven't completely wrapped my head around what that means.
Yeah, and system averaging is not relative to equalization.
Okay,
It's more relative to our size.
okay,
So that's all it is. And so it comes into play in helping us equalize our benefits on the needs side across the district. And then I'll show you how equalization comes into play. I think the other one that Senator Jacobson makes a comment about are the option enrollment students. And we acknowledge that we have option students going out. And we go through that every year in October, talking about where our option students are going and the number. But at this point in time, we have seen over the course of, I want to say 3 or 4 years, is that our option students going out and coming in, the net number is about, we'll just say 500. It doesn't really fluctuate a lot more. We lost a lot about 10 or 15 years ago, but then the number really hasn't fluctuated a whole lot after that. And we can talk about that next time if we want to, just to reiterate as we go into this. But it's really, we do see option out, but we don't get the benefit from option students. Now, with that, when you look at like a Maxwell or a Hershey, because they get more option students coming into their school than going out, so then that becomes a resource to them compared to us where we don't get any benefit because we don't see a positive number of students coming into North Platte. We always have deficit going out of the district. So we're, what we've been trying to do over the course of the last few years is try to get a lot of those students to come back because of the benefits that we have from our dual credit to now with baseball, with other opportunities in the district, but still we're not seeing, 500 students coming in.
I think the misunderstanding, we talk sometimes about, and we're very much encouraged from the Department of Education that every district really needs to tell their story as it relates to budget and finance, because every school district has their own set of circumstances that affects their budget. But I think the misunderstanding over the last 5 or 6 years, and this is coming from somebody that was in the district 16 or 17 years ago when option law changed. And that's really when we saw an influx of families deciding to option out across the state because the law made it just made it somewhat easier to option to a different school district. So I think a lot of districts, particularly larger ones, with small communities around them, saw that. They didn't see a net coming in, they saw a net going. But I think to tell the story from the last 5 or 6 years, I think people just generally look at a decline in enrollment. And I think they just naturally think, well, that must be due to option enrollment. And when we look at census data, and Mr. Simpson studies census data all the time, what we're seeing is we don't have as many 3-year-olds as what we had 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So we've got cohorts coming into the district that used to be 320, 330 kids that now are in the 250s, 260s. And I think it's just, I think it's maybe the number of younger families that we have. We don't have as many younger families, and certainly families don't have as many kids as they had 15 or 20 years ago as well. So, I think just to be able to tell our story, the last few years, when you look at this year compared to 2022, 2023, and I think it's 31 kids difference. Well, if you look at the kindergarten class that came in versus the seniors that graduated, I think that was a difference of 40 right there. And so we're graduating pretty large classes and we're not seeing classes replace them at that same rate.
And along with that, when I plug in the data for all the option students going out to the districts, I'm seeing a decline in total enrollment that they're experiencing. So when we say, we're losing, our student population is going down, their student population is going down accordingly because of what's going on. So,
Well, and then that, I assume, opens up more of those option spots as well. If their home district students are lower numbers than that.
Oh, absolutely.
Open up spots for,
Absolutely.
and they're gonna try even harder then at that point to get these options first, because they've got seats to fill and benefit from that.
I believe Mr. Simpson and I worked here a month or so ago. And as he said, Lincoln County Schools, every single district is down in enrollment from where they were 5 or 6 years ago. So, I mean, I think it's a rural Nebraska issue. I think you probably could go anywhere in the state outside of Lincoln and Omaha, and I think you're just seeing that declining enrollment. Now, what's happening in our community in Lincoln County with economic development, I think it's gonna obviously change that, which is gonna be great for us and for, I think, our area schools as well.
So going along with that and talking about enrollment as we were doing, to address the state aid formula, when they look at that information, they look at enrollment from a formula student factor. And I talked about how we look at our official enrollment in October. I'm always very much concerned about that because with the number of students that we have lost over the course of the years, I've monitored our tier schools, our 10 smaller and 10 larger schools. And so on page 5, we can see that our bottom tier has continually adjusted. Right now, we say, or we show Schuyler is the 10th smallest district of North Platte, but Gearing is within 20 students. So we always watch that bottom tier because it all depends upon what's happening in a community, how one could grow or one not can grow. And it's the same way with North Platte and South Sioux City. We were just competing constantly, is 20 students going to make us or them larger than us? So I watched that, but we also saw, I want to say Elkhorn. They were the smaller than us. And then, when they get 300 every year for the course of 5 years, all of a sudden that puts them way ahead of us. So that's how some of those tiers changed also. So I monitor that because I want to make sure, number one, where our tier is, as well as what our cost per pupil is going to be. So that's why I look at that one. Special ed, big piece of the puzzle coming in, not only from how they calculate our state aid, but how much money we're going to get in state aid coming in the next fiscal year. So let me talk about first, SPED in the state aid formula. And what we have seen over the course of the last, you can see on there since 2015, 2016, the amount of SPED reimbursement coming into the district has slowly declined, where last year we were seeing 43% of the state aid coming in for special education. Now, we know that the governor put into place 80% reimbursement for our special ed, but that was indicative on what Eric and I do on the SPED final financial report in October, which then gets calculated at the state level. And then they start in December issuing 7 monthly payments to any school district in the state. And that then will tell us if we receive 80% or not. And right now we can probably say it's on track, but I will not plug that number in until we get closer to, June and our full budget time to at least make sure we address appropriately where our SPED funding will be. So yes, we're supposed to be getting 80%, but it was starting in December and it's continually progressing till June at this point in time. The next piece that we see, and it's a few of you have been around the district over the course of the years and watched how we've discussed poverty within our state aid formula. And we lost some poverty in previous years from COVID and a few others. And it wasn't just us, it was across the state on how they were calculating it. And first of all, you have to understand, poverty is not a grant. It's just a reallocation of resources. What it does is we say, we'll take Cody. Cody is a title school, and we look at the poverty level. All those expenditures, instead of paying them out of regular instruction, I can shift them over to the poverty program. Same way with Lincoln. Now, you may want to say, well, what about McDonald or Eisenhower? Well, they probably are not at the level of a Cody or a Lincoln or a Jefferson, but we still have students that we can identify, and we can say staff as well as the principals are working with all students in the building. So with that, I try to allocate, not everybody, but a portion of their costs into there, because based upon our free and reduced percentages and how that goes through the calculation, we can claim up to 5.1 million. We're gonna get 5.1 million in state aid coming through, but I have to show that we're gonna expend 6.7 million. They then say that I should be allowed 5.7, and then based upon parents reporting on their income taxes and going through there, that I get 5.1, which is a positive sign. It gave us a 1.1 increase, which, as you can see, we did lose some traction over the last couple of years, and now we're gaining it back up. And hopefully in the future, we can at least continually grow our program, because that does help our state aid formula. And that's why I'm watching it, because I want to make sure that we get as much needs coming in. So that's another factor of why you see differentiation across the state. When you can look at a Scottsbluff or a South Sioux City or a Gretna, and how much of that funding formula comes in on the need side for poverty.
Have we seen an increase in parents filling out those forms again? Because I know we talked about what kind of hurdles last year with during COVID, parents weren't required to fill this out. I know we were kind of pushing that message out.
Yeah, and we've asked the principals to continue to push that message out and get parents, because that does help drive some of our factors in the state. So from there, we're gonna go into talking about just the levy limitation, and this is not relative to the state aid formula, but just a reminder on the levy. We're at $1.05 within the building fund and the general fund, so we're very cognizant of what must go on with but the last piece is our valuations. And I've given you a historical trend of the last 6 years of our valuations. And we've been very concerned over the last, I want to say 5 years, where we only saw 1 or 2% increase. And then 2 years ago, we saw a 5% increase. And then last year we saw a 10% increase. And I'm going to take you through how that affects our state aid, because as Dr. Rhodes and I know, and we sit and watch that, it's like that dramatically affects how state aid is run. So we're gonna now shift over to numbers, and there'll be I don't want you to glaze over, because I just want you to focus on the far two columns, 23, 24, 24, 25. Because number one, we're going to talk about a little bit about the change of certain areas, and then just the overall bottom line number at a big picture point of view. So when you looked at our official enrollment, and you can look at that on a monthly basis, I show that we had 3,634 students. But what the state does is they go through and look at your change in enrollment from October to June over the course of the last 3 years, and then calculate a weighted factor or an enrollment adjustment based upon, if you have 100 kids starting out, but by the time you're done, you had 95, they start factoring in, the attendance factor and how many students you had at the end, and come up with a formula. So you can see for North Platte Public Schools, we're always sitting at about 99%, and this last year, we dropped about 0.002. And that 0.002 still does affect on how we calculate state aid. So then it takes that 3634, runs that through the number, and as well as preschool gets a different calculation for a total enrollment of formula students of 3,531 students.
So does that mean that basically 98% of the students who started the year were still there at the end, or what is that, what that calculation is? Okay,
That's usually what they're trying to calculate.
okay.
So that plays into a factor at the end of the year, because I'll address a little bit of that when we get down to the bottom. But please remember that, so if I don't, I will address.
So it's possible, like, hopefully maybe in the upcoming years for that number to be over 1?
Yes.
They go that way, okay.
And the state will factor that in. I will address that how it was. So then, if you remember, I talked about 10 smaller, 10 larger districts. And we look at the formula, the cost per pupil of those districts. Well, they throw out the 2 smallest and the 2 largest and then average that number. And for North Platte Public Schools, you can see, this year for the state aid calculation, it's 10,165 for an average within our tier, and we're seeing a 2.9% increase compared to last year, which was really nice and beneficial. But I think, so in that, we saw a $778 increase in our need side of our formula. So that was a good piece. Then on our poverty allowance, we saw a nice increase this year, because now all of a sudden people are coming out of COVID. We're starting to get more calculations for and reduced. So we're seeing a $1.1 million increase in our need side of our formula. Then we look at every other factor other than system averaging, it's somewhat right in line, not a lot of changes. I will tell you, next year we'll be talking about special ed, but that's in the future here. So for the most part, the state says that our total system needs is $44.7 million. Now that's not a budget. That's just them on their calculation of what North Platte could operate on. And then in the process, how you fund that. So then you go down and say, oh, well, you have property taxes. And in that, property taxes should make up 2.7 million of that piece. So when people start talking about, well, how are you gonna, you need more state aid? Well, when all of a sudden the state goes through the calculation and says, but you have valuation, which then can fund that need side of the formula, then that really puts a strain, number one, on how much state aid we're gonna get, as well as where we're gonna be in the future in our budgeting process. So that's why we have to talk about state aid valuation and what's gonna go on, because that valuation does play a significant factor in it. Along with that, for North Platte Public Schools point of view, and if you look way down at the bottom past line 29, we have a certified valuation and we have a system adjusted valuation. And what happens is that when the county assessor for all counties sends it into the state, they readjust it if you do not have your valuations at or above where you should be for calculation. So for North Platte Public Schools, we've been hit the last few years because our valuations weren't up to where it should be. So we're always, number one, yes, we got a 10% increase in valuation, but there was also a factor in there of valuation increase that we didn't see either. So then they calculate that in to the state aid formula. So once again, no matter what our system needs are, they're saying you have valuation to help support the schools. Along with that, you can see other receipts. Other receipts we never really worry about. It's been flat for years. So other receipts may go up or down by $100,000 and that's it. And then obviously allocated income tax funds haven't really changed a whole lot. Yeah, they went down about 12,000, but not a lot. So we'll go back to Joanne's question, foundation aid, or equalization aid. So the state last year passed a law that said that school districts will get foundation aid. And a lot of the districts that are smaller that were not equalized, unlike North Platte Public Schools, got an allocation within their resource side of the formula that says you get foundation aid, plus then if you need it, you can have equalization aid. Which then helped them fund their budget a whole lot better and reduce their property taxes. But because we were already an equalized school district, you can see that 4 years ago or 3 years ago, we were at 9.4 in equalization aid or 9.8 in equalization aid. Well, these 2 years, you can see, oh wait, it's the same number or a little bit less, because all they did was split apart foundation aid and equalization aid. So for our purposes, we really didn't gain ground in regards to foundation aid because we're an equalized school district. And when Dr. Rhodes and I are on a Zoom with GNSA, we're always talking about, how all of us are affected by foundation aid and how we really didn't see that growth in state aid in the future. So then the last question, the last piece is, you asked about change enrollment map. So what the state does is take our enrollment now, they have the number for our state aid calculation and enrollment. Hang on. So then from there, they're gonna go through the year, and then at the end of the year, they're gonna look at where enrollment is. And they're gonna rerun state aid based upon, and I'm gonna look over at Kyle, what Kyle uploads for enrollment numbers. And that number then all of a sudden can change, positive or negative. So you can see 4 years ago or 3 years ago, we lost because we had, students that were either early graduates or left and moved to a different location after our official enrollment was taken. Positive sign is this last year, when they reran it, we had more students, because you were watching that. I want to compliment you, Mac. You mentioned that in one of the board meetings on my enrollment. So then I changed how I reported enrollment so that we could see that number starting to increase in the elementary size. So then we got a positive change in that one. But overall, we're losing 434,000 in state aid. And why is that? Quiz. You heard. Valuations. Because valuations went up so much, we lost in state aid because of our valuations. And we knew it going into this year. We were just gonna wait and see how it affected us fully, because if we wouldn't have gotten, I'm gonna say if we were blessed, we got 1.1 in poverty. But if we had not gotten that because of how the state was trying to grab data from the Department of Revenue and the federal government, that could have dramatically swung a different direction. So, right now we're down for 434,000 in state aid. I've attached some additional documents for your review, especially showing a comparison of the previous years on school districts as well as our tier of schools in the calculation, and that's at your reading pleasure. But hopefully I've laid a good foundation for you and a good understanding of state aid.
Stuart, I have some questions just to better understand that poverty allowance and those expenditures. So obviously, as a district, we don't want to incentivize poverty. We would like to see the families in our community coming out of poverty. So with that in mind, like if we start to see some of those poverty expenditures or like that need going down, would we also, on the flip side, are there things there that are currently in need that maybe if our actual poverty in our community decreases, that we would no longer have to spend money on as well? Does that make sense to where our expenditures would
Yeah.
potentially go down? as well?
It could, number one, from the standpoint, if we have obviously less students, we'll have less staff, which, like, as I talked about, I threw everything of COVID into poverty.
Right.
So then we have to evaluate, like, the salary and the benefits side about, is that appropriate or not appropriate? And then from there, all of their building supplies and the cabinet goes through and evaluates, how much I allocate to the buildings, and I'll bring that back next month and show the board how I allocate for building, because that number is not, it fluctuates according to the number of students in a building, so that, if we're growing, you're gonna get more, if you're reducing, you're gonna get less, but it tries to mimic what's going on in the district. But then after that, there's a few minor expenditures, I'm not saying, there's some additional expenditures within the poverty that could be evaluated if we were losing money or not getting as much reimbursed on that one. In the poverty program, and go through and identify that. I mean, we had the discussion about free breakfast or the CEP program, or a few other areas that could be discussed in the future if that would go down.
Sure, okay, yeah, that was my question, because obviously some of those things are expenditures that we're going to have to pay for no matter what, supplies and staff and those kinds of things. But I assumed that some of those were, if we actually saw poverty levels going down, that some of those expenditures would go down with it.
Would go down.
Yeah.
appropriately.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at page 6, this is something I remember from my first couple years before. I mean, if you look at the expenditures there, a lot of those, correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't necessarily have $4 million extra in expenses. Those are $4 million that you found that we could, right, we were already paying that we could allocate to the poverty fund. Is that right? So yeah, I mean, yes, there are probably some that have increased, but those are expenses that we were already paying, that Stuart was able to go in and say, well, wait a minute, we could get some state aid for these things.
And when the first poverty program first came out, and I'm gonna say it was back in 2000, 2001, we could say we're a little bit conservative, because we said, okay, well, we have a little bit, we have this poverty that I think we could probably put in there. The State Department was at that point in time going around the schools and doing an evaluation of your poverty program. And I remember this specifically, and the person that did it. He said, you could access, based upon your pre-reduced counts that the state pulls through to increase that poverty number. So that's why you've seen over the course of almost 10 years, why I've increased it, because they said, you can access a lot more. So I try to at least pump it up as much as I can to get that money from the state on the need side of the portfolio. But I will say this, I mean, that's why you saw a couple of years where it was declined, and that was just because of COVID and what happened there. So now we're now on the other side of it. And, if it drops, great. If we can continually at least access some of those funds, that would be great also. Other questions?
I think a key takeaway may be, and I think Mr. Simpson did a good job addressing this. I think when you look at the resource side of the formula, there is just so much weight on the local effort rate, right? And your local effort rate it's property taxes is what it is. So that's the first resource component of the equation for school finance. And so that's the first thing that the state is gonna do. They're gonna run your local effort rate. And when you have a 10% increase, they're gonna say, you can go out locally and grab those dollars. So guess what? Based on the needs side, if your needs haven't gone up, your state aid's gonna go down. It's just the way the numbers work. And so until that somehow changes, at the state level, we have a senator that actually had a bill that was eliminating TIOSA. That didn't go anywhere, but it's probably the best system that we have right now. Nobody's been able to figure out a different system for funding schools, but that resource side is so important. And they just put so much weight on your local effort rate.
Well, you mentioned the local effort rate, and our previous senator that we had, he was the chair of the education committee. And for clarification purposes, the local effort rate is $1. So if for every, value, $1,000 worth of valuation, it's $1. So that's why you're seeing what it is. Well, they bumped that up to, I believe, 1.03, which then put more pressure upon the local school district instead of shoving it more out, because at that point in time, the state was not flush with cash and they were trying to shove it back out to the local level. So that's why Dr. Rhodes and I are very much concerned about the local effort rate, because if they change that, that causes us issues. Now, we're blessed the last couple of years that they haven't, but we're always concerned, like you were saying, MP, watching the poverty level, watching local effort rate, watching, special ed. I mean, we're watching all those numbers go through and making sure that they're where we feel they should be so that we can address them quickly.
So as far as the governor's plan to potentially increase the state sales tax to help reduce property taxes, my understanding then is that that money is going to be controlled in Lincoln somehow. So the redistribution of that could have an effect on us.
Right, because you're gonna see, obviously, there's a lot more senators in the Lincoln, Omaha area. So they're gonna try, and I don't blame the school districts. They're gonna say, we've lost, we'll say $10 million or 20 million or whatever the number is. And we need some of those resources to build ourselves back up. And bless Senator Jacobson and a few other ones, they're gonna say, we gotta get something out here. You're gonna have sales tax. You got it out here. So that's the biggest concern I think we heard today is, as they talk about sales tax, how is that gonna be fairly distributed across the state?
So am I making it too simple when I look at your graph here and line 18 is the property taxes line? Basically, the state is saying you have 2.7 more million in property taxes that you can access this year. So that's
Absolutely.
the increase in our
That's what the
resources.
formula says.
So our overall monies received equals out. It's just you're receiving it in property taxes
Correct.
instead of from the state. So
Right.
we're not technically losing money. We're losing state aid,
Yes.
Yes,
but we're gaining over here,
right.
which
And that's,
stinks for our constituents who are paying
absolutely.
those taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
but that's
I
the
mean, it's all
big,
tax money.
yeah, but I think this is a good point with the committee as a whole. It allows me to communicate, before I was talking to the finance committee, but now it's like, I gotta tell everybody because that's been our biggest concern is that all of a sudden they're putting, they're talking about property taxes, but they're putting the pressure back upon us locally to try to fund a school district and with that portion of the money. Now I'm gonna do something. Oh, boy.
Got it going.
Yeah, I know. So, as I talk to you about how much is our budget, not including grants, because grants are a wash, in and out, and we know that. So how much is our budget funded by property taxes?
65.9%.
No, that's not that. It was 62, but now the state is saying 65.9.
Yeah, right.
But that's what I'm saying is that, and it's a good observation that all of a sudden they're putting more pressure on our constituents. So that all of a sudden equals to 65.9% of the property taxes instead of 62, because, that's where they're saying the resources should come from.
You put the calculator right in front of me. Okay, any further questions for Stuart?
Great explanation, Stuart.
Thank you. If when you get home and are lying in bed and trying to go to sleep and thinking about it, and I've given Matt a bad time, but I'm proud of him as he's looked at a few things. please reach out to me and email me and ask some questions because, I'm here. And next month I'll try to bring back more because we do need to build up a good foundation as we go into the budget process. All right, let me stop sharing.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the contracts with ESU 16. Stuart, I thought that was
Oh,
your.
okay, once again, I'm running my mouth. North Platte Public Schools, along with all of the other districts in Lincoln County, work through ESU 16 and try to address their needs. Now, for North Platte Public Schools, obviously, we don't need the resources that ESU 16 offers, unlike a Hershey or Maxwell, because they don't have teaching and learning. They don't have some of the other resources that we can tap into. So when we look at our contracts with ESU 16, we only really have two. And one is the SNID contract or distant learning. And that really is helpful to everybody. And I mean, we have to access internet like Hershey and Maxwell and Wallace and so forth. And we just go through one big pipe because that's how the state set up everybody across Nebraska, that you had to go through your ESU to get onto the internet so that you can do your whatever you need to do, like teaching and learning and students with their computers, as well as finance, as well as anything else. So we pay just as much as anybody else pays. We do actually pay a little bit more because when you look at North Platte Public School size of 3,500 students, all the districts that go into ESU 16 don't even amount to 3,500 kids. So we have a lot of traffic going in and out of that pipe. So with that, we have to buy some additional pipe width or bandwidth so that we can get through internet. So when you look at that contract, then the second one is with the ESU and special ed. And that's just indicative on, sometimes we have, when Kevin's interviewing for a staff member, we'll say speech path, sometimes those staff members will migrate to the issue. Well, then that gives Erica heartburn, and all of a sudden she can't access that speech path. So then therefore we have to go and work with the issue and trying to get some of those services through special ed that they're just not out there for us, and they either go to the issue or somewhere else. So we try to go through them. But then again, when we look at all of our districts in Lincoln County, all of them access the issue and pay a certain fee for special ed. ESUs are only required to do, and I'm gonna wing it, and I could be wrong, but I know it's really just teaching and learning and assessment. And there's three factors that they do, but special ed is just one that is not funded by the issue. It's funded by all the districts paying in to support whatever services they need. So for our purposes, we've always gone through and tried to address the services that we need, and then go through and make sure that they're meeting our needs for our students in their life. So that's the two contracts that we sign every year. I'm gonna digress a little bit. They do help the other districts with Title I, Title II Part A, and I think there's another grant out there, but for our,
Title IV, Perkins.
yeah,
They are the grant managers for smaller schools where we handle all our grants internally. So those small districts will consort with the issue, and that's part of their contract then. And having kind of gone through that, that's a significant budget cost for those school districts to consort those funds. But they don't have the FTE that they can do it on site. And similar to special education, they don't have a special education director or teaching and learning curriculum assessment and those types of things. So they consort a large percentage as compared to us, obviously. So But those are the two
Right.
that we do work with our ESU on in terms of contractual services.
And we do, because obviously, we just talked about valuation. Our valuation is large going in to support the issue. We do get a person coming back in to help with our staff members on educating. And so we have a staff member coming into the district as a facilitator to help our staff members. And that's paid by the issue. They just are assigned to North Platte Public Schools. So, you know, we're giving them a lot of property taxes, and so they're helping support us in that way. Questions?
All right, Mr. Mills, staffing update, please.
Thank you. Great job, Stuart. Thank you. I always learn something from Mr. Simpson every time, so I appreciate that foundation. Well, happy leap year, February 29th. Is this really even happening? Is this real? I want to start off with some positive, fantastic news, and several of you were there yesterday. At Lincoln Elementary yesterday, we had the Commissioner Marr and NDE and Chadron State College come and make a little media blitz. Thank you for the media folks to be there as well. That's for our parent-to-teacher program or apprentice program, because the apprentice program, it's a federal grant. That's why, if you heard those words yesterday, that we don't use a lot, teacher apprentice program, it comes from that. So that's very exciting, for the state and for us here in North Platte to have that recognition. So thanks for those that were there. And then another thanks real quick to Matt. I reached out to him last week when we had a candidate that had a wife that needed a position here in North Platte. And so I reached out to Matt, and he made some connections too, and happy to report that we've able to hire an orchestra teacher because his significant other was able to get a position too. So it truly is, recruiting truly is all of us. It truly the whole community. So thank you for your effort there. Quick update here on personnel. I'm gonna bring a little bit of RTA into this conversation as well, because it's hard not to talk about staffing without talking about RTA as well. And RTA, as you well know, is for the elementary level. So when we start looking at our staffing, I want to give the board a report tonight that could not be more excited. We have 21 hires so far. We have 11 individuals that have resigned, and we have 6 retirees. So right now, we're focusing on the positions that we obviously have open. We're focusing on English position at Madison. And then we do have a computer teacher interview set up for next week for the high school. Then we also have a special education position that we're going to seek out as well. So with that being said, we've been very busy. I've been keeping Carol very busy with hires, a lot of interviews happening, and we have some fantastic candidates. And I have to tell you at least one story, because I've told several of you individuals about it. One of the things I want to thank the board for as well is that our student teachers now get $2,000. And I really want to tell you folks that that's made a difference, because we have 6 student teachers now. And so when we started to interview those student teachers and offer some positions, I had the opportunity to go to Eisenhower yesterday, or 2 days ago, and offer a student teacher a teaching position. And it was the most exciting time that I think I've had in education for a long time. This teacher was so excited, those students overnight. And other teachers were there because they knew why I was there. And so they're waiting, and the kids are all waiting. And then finally I shook her hand and offered the position, and she accepted it. And she was all giddy and giggly. And the kids were like, "You got a job." So very, very exciting that we've been able to hire a couple of student teachers. And I bring that up because currently we're obviously advertising for next fall. And I already have 3 confirmed so far. So that process is starting to work, that grow your own with the student teachers being here. So couldn't be more excited about that. So when we start to look at staffing, one of the biggest things we have to look at is our kindergarten through 5th grade numbers. And because we have staffing through teachers per grade level. So we start to look at numbers, and Dr. Rhodes and Stuart, and many of you have talked about the decrease in enrollment. So currently, when we look at staffing, we got to make sure that we have enough kids for all the teachers that we do have. So right now, kindergarten, as Dr. Rhodes alluded to, are a little bit low. So we're watching those numbers to make sure we don't have an extra kindergarten teacher. So that brings in RTA. So when people start to look at RTA, we've restructured that process and it's on the website. So if you want to take a look at it anytime, you go to the quick links and it's request to attend, click on that, and then the forms are there. So I've trained all the secretaries for any phone calls that may come in with RTA. I've talked to all of them along with all elementary principals. And so what we look at with RTA is that unique hardship that parents may have, and then they'll fill out a form and then we'll take a look at that. And then the other piece that we always look at is siblings. So I think most of you are familiar, in the past, we've moved kids, so now young Kevin's coming up and my brothers are at a different school than my home school. So we want to honor those siblings but then we won't do anybody new. Any student comes new, we won't RTA them, obviously unless there's a unique hardship. So we look at all those numbers to make sure that we'd never want to move a lot of kids that would then offset one of those kindergarten classes. Does that make sense? Okay, so we look at those every day, and analyze them. I work closely with Cheryl Hall, work closely with the principals and Lindsay for elementary, as we continue to monitor those. So we've made most of those RTA right now. Those are all been taken care of. As they come in, we put them on a spreadsheet, and then I look them over, and then we take them to the cabinet, we look them over. Brandy may weigh in on some of them. So we have that process that seems to be rolling pretty well so far. But I just want to make sure the board was aware of all those different things. Just as Stuart talks about finance, all those different pieces come into play so that we can hire teachers, obviously for each school, and then the curriculum comes in, and communication comes in through Brent. So it all fits together. So I just wanted to take a minute to make sure that the board knows that when we look at staffing, we're also looking at RTA, and it is all combined together.
Do we have any kindergarten classes right now that we're looking at potentially losing a track at one of the schools or anything, or is it too early to tell?
Too early to tell. Yeah, I was gonna say, it's too early to tell. We're pushing really hard. We have all principals and secretaries. I was down in Cheryl's office today. We called the parents and you haven't registered your child yet. So it's too early to tell.
I think what we do know is that in terms of, if you just look at comparative time from year to year, that we do not have as many kindergartners enrolled today as what we did a year ago. And so now I'll tell you that the census shows that 4 or 5 year old, those preschoolers going into kindergarten next year. We don't have as many of those kids across the district. Again, Stuart and I look at that census data. That just isn't we didn't fill our preschool this past year.
Right.
When I talk to the privates, they have seats open in their private preschools as well. So, we added a section with the thought that we were going to see some growth in the community, and I think we erred on the correct side, but we haven't seen that with that particular age group, and I think that may be the case with the 3-year-olds as well. So I think there's probably a better than good chance that next year's kindergarten will be a slightly smaller number than this year's. I don't think that'll be the same, because I think this year's kindergarten 274.
Yep.
And I just don't think we're gonna get to 274 with this group of 4-year-olds, right?
Correct.
So I think it might be an anomaly as well, with the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds right now being a little bit smaller group across the community. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. But we do know that some people have not registered their students yet as well. So we know that that's going on as too. I think Mr. Peterson's done a really nice job of advertising registration, and he's gotten that out to some different medias out there. And of course, we do the yard signs at the various schools as well. So we'll have to see. I think probably end of February is too early to make a judgment or a say on where we're at with staffing for sure for that particular grade. So
Kevin, what's our process and timeline for making decisions? Because I know ever since we put that out, gosh, that board meeting a few months ago when we discussed that. I've had, as far as if we're allowing them to change school buildings, because I know I've had a lot of parents that the situation you're talking about, they've got 3 kids at this building and now they're afraid
Yeah.
this kindergartner's going here, and I think they're kind of in a panic.
Right.
So when they come to me, I mean, I tell them to do the process, but is there a timeline of when we're looking at notifying them so that, you know, they're on track to attend
Absolutely.
open houses and things?
If they've talked to us, we have them on a spreadsheet and the date will be March 15th.
March
We'll get them all covered up.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so if
Yep.
somebody says, okay, we haven't heard.
Yep.
We can tell them. that's the
Absolutely.
date.
And we're working through that list now. We've contacted, I would say, probably 95% of them on that list right now, Emily. There's a couple that don't quite fit the criteria, so we're working with those individuals and setting up meetings with them.
Okay.
Good question. That's all I have to answer.
Okay, and just a note, the resignation letters are attached to the agenda. These are part of a personnel file, so they're confidential. So just wanted to reiterate that before we move on. Okay, so strategic plan update, Dr. Rhodes.
Thank you. So I am sharing my screen, so that on streaming, this can be viewed, but you do have a hard copy. So I'm not necessarily going to go all the way through this, but I want to talk a little bit about a timeline on how we can kind of put a closure in terms of the strategic plan and school year 2023-2024. And so if you would just take a look at the second page. So first of all, a presentation very similar to this is on our website, as well as the strategic plan. But if you look on the right side of this particular page of this presentation, so I went back and I did a lot of research past the current strategic plan that we have. So we have a strategic plan that went into implementation during the 2015-2016 year that, quite honestly, if it wasn't the exact same version of the 2025, it was really, really similar. I think there were a few things taken off, but those 2 strategic plans, for my research, really look the same. So you can see that first bullet is that the 2025 was implemented from the 2015 with some small revisions. So to take you back in that time, AQuest had come up at that point, which is our accountability system. So the strategic plans, though, from those 2 cycles had a lot of AQuest flair in it and a lot of AQuest language. They had the tenets in there, governance was in there, which is a tenet, kind of the career and college readiness was built into it. And so you were provided, if you were on the board at that time, in the winter of 2021, you were provided an update. And speaking specifically around the 2025 strategic plan. In 22, you were provided an update with, really, they were progress updates, is what they were at that point, based on that original strategic plan, which, by the way, had 8 specific strategies or goals in it. It was really, really lengthy. And so when we provided the progress update, February of 2023, we also have revised the strategic plan for the next 2 years of the cycle. And we were able to, as a cabinet, we were able to take some of those strategies and put it into one that were part of the initial. And then some, quite honestly, have been met. For instance, the first strategy of the 2025 original strategic plan was around purpose and direction. And, when we met as a cabinet, we continually communicate our purpose and direction. So that's a normal part of being who we are. So we took that out. And again, that's what we provided the board in February of 2023. But what I really want to start doing is really looking at our annual progress in terms of the strategic plan and taking some time to really talk about that progress individually on those strategies. So this is maybe a recommendation, I mean, and we can get some more feedback at the March board meeting. But what I would like to do is do the progress updates in the next 3 months. So that when we get to the committee of the whole in March, we're gonna give you the progress updates on strategy 1. And then when we get to April, we'll do strategy 2. And then when we get to May, we'll do strategy 3, which from a timeline, I think is pretty good. If you look at strategy 3, that is really your learning environment. So that's finance. It's really that finance and facilities. And so we're gonna be really getting into even more budget discussion. So we can kind of wrap up that particular strategy by presenting kind of what we've done to meet it in May. And then we're just gonna transition to continue to talk about the 2024, 2025 budget. So are there any questions on kind of maybe that proposal, or I think it gives you, I think it'll give us more time to really have a conversation about the strategies and the progress and kind of the actions that we've taken in the district to meet that particular goal. If you look on the left side, then I think the other thing I just want to be very, very conscientious about is how we finish this school year and transition into next school year and make sure that we give the proper due to the last year of the strategic plan as we're getting ready for a brand new strategic plan. And so I just put on that left side, the 25-30 strategic plan, and you know these dates. Some of you, thank you for volunteering to be on that strategic planning committee. You know, that's June again, as we kind of wrap up this school year with talking about strategy 3 in May. The following month, we're going to start talking about a new strategic plan and actually probably look at some of the information from the old strategic plan. The winter of 2025 then probably will be February. We're gonna come to the board and we're gonna do our progress review, start our progress review on the last year of the strategic plan we have in place. And then we're gonna ask for approval of the new strategic plan. We're probably gonna do that in February so that we're ready to go and hit the ground running when we get to that new school year. So we kind of mesh those two a little bit together. And then, of course, the new strategic plan will be implemented fully in 2025, 2026. Any questions around that? Okay, this is a document that we do have our purpose and direction in. We talk a little bit about strategic planning. Again, this next round of strategic planning is going to be different than what we've done in the past in the district. Again, we did use a lot of perceptual survey data. We used AQuest data points. And then I think there's some conversation at the cabinet level in terms of the development of the strategic plan. So we did have stakeholder involvement. But it wasn't necessarily around a table and really talking about big rocks in the district and where we should have our focus. So, you know, this round is going to be much different, where you're going to have stakeholders represented in this process, not just with the strategic planning committee, but remember, once those strategies are identified after June 14th, then each one of those strategies will have an action team that will start to meet on how are we going to know if we're meeting this strategy. And they'll build the roadmap for each strategy. Some people on the strategic planning committee may be on those action teams, but sometimes it's brand new people based on their expertise or what they do in the district or what they do in the community. So that's a different stakeholder group. There is a student essence to this as well. We'll have 2 soon-to-be seniors in June that will be on our committee as well. And Mr. Stepanski has already started to work on some names for us. So we'll have this kind of a student voice in that as well. Again, we have the purpose and direction. One of the things we really do, I think at the district level, we talk about our values at every cabinet meeting. We do that with our principals and ADCO. We highly encourage our building principals as they're meeting with either SIP teams or teacher leadership teams, that they always start their meetings with our purpose and direction. that they always talk about the values of the district. The values will be called something a little different for the new strategic plan. Those will be district beliefs. Just a little bit change in the language. Purpose and direction might change to mission and vision. I mean, it's just a change of wording is all. Their definitions are certainly the same. And then if you remember from February of 23, the three strategies are, number one is providing expanded opportunity, educational opportunities for all students. Strategy 2 is really about our ability to invest in our people, to have highly trained, to be able to highly train them, and also that affects retention, we believe. And then there's a recruitment piece as well with strategy 2. And then strategy 3 is really about the learning environment that we want to establish, you know, the safe and healthy learning environment, which is a little bit of finance and obviously facility, and a little bit of opportunity of equity in classrooms as well. So I'm not necessarily going to go through each one of the strategies, but we do have 3 areas under each strategy, and then each one of those has action steps. And that's what we'll be presenting in the upcoming months in terms of progress. We're going to talk a lot about the action steps. You know, one of the areas that we really evaluated on one of the strategies was project search. And that's written right in this document. And, you know, the effectiveness of that program, the staffing of that program, and whether it was really providing the opportunities for kids that it needed to, or was there something else we were doing in the district? And, you know, and just to share, and we'll share this as one of the kind of the progress, is that that's a program that we didn't feel that we needed. At the time when it was implemented, it was a great program. And I think we'll always continue that when we have programs and we don't think at that point in time, for whatever reason, it's not a program that is effective for our students, I think we're always going to look at potentially bringing a program like that back, because we have a little bit of experience in the implementation of it. So I kind of let the cat out of the bag on that one, but we'll share more on it when we get to those meetings. So again, I don't want this to be a long presentation, because we're going to talk a lot about this in upcoming meetings. So are there questions? Or I think we're excited. I will just tell you, you know, I've been here a little over a year and a half. I will just tell you it's hard to walk into a middle of a strategic plan that you haven't been a part of. And I think that was probably the impetus for the cabinet to sit down and really take a look at what we had. And we celebrated the accomplishments with the original strategic plan as well, because there were Dr. Hansen and the cabinet members, they did a lot of work on that. And there were a lot of celebrations and accomplishments with that. But there were also things that we could those were things we could check off the list too. And some, in my opinion, were not applicable to a strategic plan either. You know, if you're really goal oriented, these are goals, and then you have that action plan and action steps to meet that. So I'm excited for this next planning process with the new strategic plan. So questions, comments for me on that? Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to the policy review.
So I will continue to share my screen. Okay, so I just brought up, and this was, thank you to Emily and Sheila. We talked a lot, or Emily really had a good suggestion about how publicly, you know, our community can go out and grab our policies in an easier manner. So Sheila worked with our technology department. And so when the policies when that item is clicked on off the website, this table of contents comes up. So, and then very easy to, I think, navigate and to use. So I guess what I would just ask, we had a few policies that we would like to visit about and potentially talk about revising. But we can certainly start with any policies that anybody has a question on. The policies that we have provided hard copies for the board, and then also they were attached to the agenda were 6025, 6027, and then a brand new policy 6038, which is an artificial intelligence policy. So if we want any discussion on any policies before that, if you have time to peruse them, we did go through these as a cabinet to make sure that what we are practicing matches what we have in policy. So we had some good discussion around that. So I would just open it up to the board. And if you want to look at a different policy, I can just go ahead and open it up and it'll be on the screen.
I remember earlier in the, what was it, fall, when we had an artificial intelligence ones that we looked at, and then we pulled it because of recommendations of our school attorneys, correct?
Yes, and then this came out
And-
from KSB.
And that was my.
Yeah, they wanted to wait and,
Yeah.
and see
So
kind of what
this was
the
vetted by
KSB.
KSB.
That came from KSB.
Thank you.
And on the AI policy, has it been through different, like principals, teachers, cabinet members?
So I know both, I believe both Mrs. Douglas and Mrs. Carlson have visited with, our grading committee that we have. That was a discussion that they had. I think what came from the discussion, it's so new, nobody really knows for sure maybe what is the best policy and what isn't, because we just haven't had these type of policies. I think the nice thing about the policy is it follows our handbook closely in terms of academic dishonesty, but it does give our teaching staff some autonomy that they can allow the use of the AI to different levels and different degrees on different assignments. But as clearly communicated in the policy, you have to communicate that to your students prior to giving the assignment. And so I don't want to speak. Mrs. Carlson, did you have any other specific remarks?
No, I just appreciate, that KSB provided a policy, because I think it is something that is new. AI has been around for a long time. It's used obviously in a variety of capacities, and I agree with Dr. Rhodes, that, bullet number one, unless we affirmatively communicate to students that it may be used, then it may not be used. And so, we've been, as teachers, we've been using, English teachers, I'll just use that as an example. We use a platform system of turnitin.com. So any of our essays or any research that is done by students, teachers can run that through the platform to determine if a portion, if a certain percentage, and I know Mr. Altig is nodding, if any of that is plagiarized or utilized in that capacity. It's not to say that we haven't run into situations where students maybe have tried to turn something in that they did on ChatGPT or utilized AI. And so I think our teachers are becoming more familiar with what those systems do. But again, I think there's probably, I could probably turn to Mr. Peterson, who, utilizes positively AI in the classes that he teaches, right? And so I think we have to find a balance, but I think we have to leave that. I like that this gives teachers that autonomy to make a decision as to whether or not it's something that is okay to use in their classroom or if it's not.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point, because it's where the world's moving,
It is.
so we are gonna have to.
Yeah.
Have some subjects where our students need to know how to positively use these things, and so I think it's good to have that discretion that, yes, you can use it, but here are the parameters. And unless we tell you that you can, you're not using it.
And it's a policy which, again, like all our policies, eventually can be adapted and changed
Right.
over time, but I think it's very essential that we have one. Because you see it and you hear about it every day on news or whatever it is about AI and all those things. So our kids our students know that it's there and they probably, they know a lot better than I would how to access it. But the fact is, we need one to show that we know it's a concern, but we can use it in a positive manner in certain instances. So I like it a lot. I read it a couple times after it was sent out, and they did a good job in putting it together. And it will match, I assume, numerous other school districts that use KSB, correct?
Yeah. Some districts have already adopted that policy. Some are still kind of in a wait and see. I think just like with any technology, I think we'll always be running to catch up with these types of things. Because today it's called one thing and there's gonna be all different kinds of, you know, programs that kids are gonna be able to access for free information. And I think you're right. I think, Matt, you bring up an important point, and as well as Mrs. Carlson, you know, there's some positives to teaching kids how to use things appropriately as it relates to this. It could be a great tool, you know, based on whatever your assignment is, in terms of your ability to go out and do really, really good research and find correct information within that research. So it certainly can be a good teaching opportunity as well.
So just an example of that, I'm taking a master's degree class right now. And as one of our assignments, we were assigned to use ChatGPT to create a memo, a budget document memo. And it was really interesting. One of the other people in my class mentioned, as we were evaluating whether this was a good tool or not, that there was an attorney that actually used this to create a legal brief. And the information in the legal brief was actually incorrect.
Right.
There were a bunch of false cases that were case law cases that were included in that. And so the attorney actually got fined for using the AI. And so it is something that I think our students are going to be exposed to. And it's good that they're getting some exposure now so that they know how to deal with it in the future. So.
What we'll do with this is, I don't think we sense any urgency around this policy. So I think we can take the normal time to get this approved. So we would do an actual first reading, at the regular March board meeting, and then bring back for, a final reading and, the potential or the recommendation for adoption, in April is what we would do with this new policy. I just brought up 6025, which is student cell phone electronic devices. We did have a discussion with principals about what they felt about this policy, what was adequate with this policy, you know, and what was in practice with this policy. And I did reach out to two school districts that do the overall, you cannot have cell phones in school. And so I did collect a little information for the board. The one superintendent that I talked to said, we started in January, we really can't. He goes, I wouldn't feel comfortable commenting on it because we haven't had it long enough. He did indicate the biggest issue that he saw from his lens was the consistency with which teachers were applying the policy. And then that was creating some problems for building administrators. Does that become then a personnel type situation where you're not following policy? So they were kind of struggling with it, but he could not give me an answer on whether he thought it was being effective or helping with instruction or classroom management or those different types of things. The other superintendents from a small school district, and by the time they got to Christmas, they said, we are not doing this anymore. They couldn't manage it. Their students became fairly rebellious. There were parents said, that's a property right for us. Parents were communicating, if my child needs to get a hold of me, I want them to have that cell phone. And so and I think they did meet with people, and I think they met with their student council. And so it was really a collaborative decision that, hey, we tried this and And it didn't work, but here, students, please follow the rules that we do have as it relates to cell phones. So I'll continue to reach out. I did not hear anything back from Lincoln Public Schools. They were another one that has put that in place as well. So we'll continue to visit with them. From the perception that I got from our principals, was that they were not comfortable implementing a cell phone ban. Would that be a correct statement, Mrs. Carlson? They thought it would be very, very difficult to police that. And I think they do have a trust in their teachers and the autonomy for their teachers, that sometimes it can be an incentive to have that phone as well. And so I think they really brought up some positives for allowing the cell phone, not necessarily use, but just having the cell phone on your person. So in terms of the policy, they had a difficult time with the original policy states students may not have cell phones and electronic devices, and then it goes into restrooms, locker rooms, those types of places. They recommend just kind of a more lenient language around that they should not. They felt that they can't always police the canots. And they felt like the 2 paragraphs below that paragraph, it doesn't matter where you're at. You do either one of those other 2 things, and you're in violation of this policy. So to a degree, I think we wanted to honor those administrators because we had a pretty long discussion about it, but they said, by all means, everything else in the policy is what we adhere to and try and implement in our buildings. Questions or comments around that? Okay. And then the other policy that this is just a procedural and practice change. So on the parental, and this deals with field trips, under parental permission, Mrs. Douglas was going through this policy, and the way that we get permission for field trips and the practice we use is not what we have in policy. And so what we have in policy currently is each student must submit a signed parental permission slip prior to being allowed to attend a field trip. A new permission slip must be submitted for each trip. And so actually what we do is at the beginning of the year, when we're kind of doing the beginning of the year paperwork, is when we do the field trip permission slips. And then the students and their parents submit one release form for field trips, and then we keep that on file. Correct? So we don't, for every field trip, we don't submit a new permission slip.
Is there a process a parent can go through if for some reason they don't want their child to go on an upcoming field trip?
Yeah, I think they just notify the principal or the teacher.
Yeah. And that isn't a problem. We've had kids stay back for various field trips for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to make sure that they know that they have the option to opt out and that they've been given reasonable notice to make that decision. But I see what you're saying. There might be instances where these 5 things they're fine with, but for whatever reason.
We can work on some language, I think, that we can bend within that particular paragraph. That is kind of, if parents feel that they do not want their child to participate in this field trip, please we'll have them contact building administrator and yeah, we can do that. So we'll add that in. We've always asked for your approval of revisions, as we've kind of gone through this. So we'll add that in. These 2 would be on the March regular board meeting then for approval of revisions. Any other questions or comments on the policy? No. And we'll start this process over again. KSB most likely, it depends. There is talk of a summer session.
Yeah.
Governor Pillen has said, based on what the legislature gets done here the last 24 days, that he'll call them back to a summer session. And if that's the case, it could delay policy updates from KSB. But we typically try and bring those to you in June or July, especially if we have to embed those in the student handbooks or staff handbooks. And then we'll start over again with, we'll decide on how we want to review moving forward. I think we're pretty good to do that at the committee of the whole, so, we'll kind of look at that. We'll get the ones that need to be revised and recommended to be revised first in June and July. And then we'll talk about going through and doing policy review. That's all I have for that, Jim.
Okay. Just a question before we leave. Is this feeling a little bit more, like a committee meeting as far as like the formality and everything, or? I know there was a little bit of discussion, so. Okay, it's kind of been nice not to have the microphone, so hopefully that's working out. So,
I like no microphone. I feel like we can just talk like normal people and not wait for someone to push a button and then turn this off. I think that lends itself to a much more,
Discussion.
yeah, absolutely.
Works really well when people have their volume turned down on their.
Not to make anything.
No name.
Twice.
That was, I'm getting used to this, I'm getting used to
You
this.
can only use that excuse for so
Yeah.
much
I
longer.
know.
okay, I need a
I'll make a
motion to adjourn, please.
Second.
Roll call.
Cindy O'Connor. Aye. Skip Ballsy.
Aye.
Angela Blaze. Aye. Matthew Peterson.
Hi.
Emily Garrett.
Hi.
Joanna Green.
I
Aye,
think the only person
and
that
we're adjourned.
doesn't set up is Sheila. She can't ever tell who's making motions.
Yeah.
So I think you're the only one that doesn't like the no microphone
Oh,
thing
yeah.
because.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,